Listo. Pues continuamos. Hola a todos, a todas las personas que se han quedado en esta transmisión. Les agradezco por haber, si apenas están integrando, pues bienvenidos. A los que ya llevan aquí con nosotros los dos primeros momentos, muchas gracias por continuar con nosotros. Esta es nuestra plática de clausura. Y pues en esta ocasión estamos bastante emocionados, al igual que todo este momento que hemos estado en las tres momentos. En esta ocasión, pues la conferencia de clausura va a estar realizada por la doctora Anne Kustritz. Ella es, hello Anne.
Hello.
Ella es de la Universidad de Utrecht, en Países Bajos. Tiene un PhD en American Culture por la Universidad de Michigan y es profesora asistente igual de la Universidad de Utrecht. Pues sus disciplinas y los trabajos que ha manejado pues están muy relacionados con el fandom, pero también pues estudia como el cine, teoría literaria, comunicación, antropología cultural, teoría social. Entonces en realidad tiene eh, unos intereses bastante amplios. Me parece que es muy acorde con el cierre de este ejercicio, este encuentro que hemos realizado. Y de igual manera esperamos pues sus comentarios vía Facebook, vía YouTube. Y yo los voy a leer, no, los voy a traducir para Anne. De cualquier manera, Anne también se sabe manejar en español. You know some Spanish, right, Anne? So, but yeah, we're going to do our best to answer the questions, and I'm going to do my best to translate it for you.
Sounds good.
And well, hello again. I just presented you like for all the audience. They're watching us via Facebook and YouTube. And this is the closure talk for this exercise, and it's been quite exciting one. But the space is yours. The presentation you have already loaded it, so I'm going to stay here and take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be here with all of you in Mexicali, although virtually. So thank you very much for having me. I'd like to specifically thank the organizers, Cesar Jimenez Yanez and Ayla Huerta Miranda. Thank you for inviting me, and to the Universidad Autónoma de Baja California, thank you for hosting the event. I'm going to begin with maybe a strange idea, that to understand fan studies and fan communities in the present, we need to go backwards, specifically to the transition from print to digital media around the turn of the millennium. These years began the enormous social, legal, and economic changes that we are still living within today. And in some cases, we are only now beginning to come to grips with the consequences of choices that we made 2 decades ago. For instance, the dissolution of media gatekeepers started by internet self-publishing opportunities in the early 1990s continues to reverberate through global democratic political systems today. And alterations in intellectual property law connected to technologies of lossless copying, like the MP3, have fundamentally remade the entire media industry, including our roles as fans and consumers. If we would like to think deeply about what it means to be a fan in the digital media marketplace of the 2020s, I argue we must begin our search in the 1990s. I became part of organized fandom in the early 1990s and started to study slash fan fiction in 1996. As such, I'm an aka-fan, that is both a scholar and a fan, and a fan myself. What I find most important and useful about the concept of an aka-fan is the way in which it draws our attention to the particularity of our intellectual ancestry and our knowledge-making practices. Therefore, it is important to note that I am a specialist in organized communities of female fans who produce transformative works like the ones that I have in my presentation right now. What I mean by organized is that these communities had an established sociocultural and economic infrastructure. They thought of themselves as part of a community, and they maintain a self-aware dialogue about their own history. It's worth noting that my conclusions sometimes, but do not always, extend past this particular community. My article, Slashing the Romance Narrative, is based on the fan fiction forums and listservs of the period from 1996 until 2001. From 2001 through 2007, I undertook a mixed online and in-person ethnography of the slash fan fiction community, including approximately 240 interviews. In person, I visited multiple cities in the USA, Canada, and Australia, while online my participants came from all over the world, although they were drawn primarily from English-speaking online spaces. In this time period, print and digital media overlapped. It was still common to find fan fiction both in print zines and digital archives, and to use an online service like meetup.com to find an in-person party where you could share analog media like VHS tapes with other fans. In the intervening years since 2007, lessons and questions from the turn of the millennium continue to draw me back and capture my attention. So today I would like to invite you to time travel with me and consider how fans' social and narrative experiments in the early internet might inform the way that we understand modern fan struggles with community cohesion, stability, and independence on forums like Twitter and TikTok. In particular, I would like to excavate the antecedents of contemporary crises over commodification and ideological resistance, charting a path from recent discussions about alt-right appropriation of fandom to the social imagination of fans developing an internet infrastructure for the first time back in the mid-90s. In their book, The Internet and Ethnographic Approach, Daniel Miller and Don Slater argue that discussion of the internet in the 90s was dominated by rival utopian and dystopian rhetoric. For better or for worse, although neither set of predictions fully came true, we are still attempting to resolve whether the internet increases or forecloses democracy and human freedom. Fan communities, as a few among millions of experiments in digital life, provide us with one window into these larger questions. As an interdisciplinary field, fan studies bounces between media studies, musicology, sociology, as well as other fields. However, one of the most enduring intellectual legacies fan scholars often must grapple with is the cultural studies analysis of popular culture. Born in the wake of Frankfurt School critiques of popular culture as mass deception, Birmingham School Cultural Studies defined itself through ethnographically inflected studies of audience communities who creatively reuse media for their own purposes. As a result, the question of audience activity became central to debates during this period. While the Frankfurt School emphasizes the passivity of audiences, cultural studies scholars excavated playful tactics by which audiences resist mass media messages and use popular culture to construct their own autonomous identities, meanings, communities, and practices. Thus, the theory of audience activity, combined with affordances of new media, seemed to promise that the internet would usher in a new era of more democratic politics and media. Yet, while many of the things such theorists predicted came true, the prominence of amateur media, the centrality of online communities, and the breakdown of elitist gatekeeping. At the same time, many of the most profound effects of digitization Web 2.0 have been very different. As a result, existing theories from the turn of the millennium left us poorly prepared to understand, for example, why an enormous collaborative community of fans would mobilize together in order to harass women working in the video game industry, or why the convergence of politics and fandom online has emboldened the far right. Overall, I want to suggest the main legacy of debates about activity and passivity of audiences has been confusion between material and ideological layers of analysis, as well as conflation between activity and resistance, and between resistance and progressive politics. The problematic legacy of the debate between the Frankfurt School and the Birmingham School structure both the development of fan studies and practical issues faced by fan communities, especially through the ongoing digital transition. For the purpose of this discussion, the central terms of disagreement are about resistance, activity, agency, and interest. And when I say interest, I mean in the sense of to act in your own interest. To specify, the framework of debate frequently carried the implicit assumption that audience activity would inevitably be empowering and democratic because when audiences act, they do so to resist hierarchy. That resistance is primarily economic, and they act in their own interest, which is increasingly towards robust democratic institutions, greater tolerance, and greater diversity. The changing framework of debate is clearly visible in the space between Henry Jenkins' two landmark fan studies textbooks, Textual Poachers and Convergence Culture. In 1992, Textual Poachers was situated within the passivity-activity debate, as evidence that audiences can negotiate meanings within the mass media. Organized communities of creative fans who make art, fiction, costumes, and video are some of the most dramatic examples of this principle because they produce so much material, and in doing so, they demonstrate how they alter that material from their own point of view. As such, Henry Jenkins positioned fans as resistant readers par excellence, who are empowered rather than controlled by mass media, because through it they express their own desires, and thus they act in their own interest, not in the interest of media producers. However, by 2006, when Jenkins published Convergence Culture, mobile media and Web 2.0 had transformed the media industry, which increasingly relied on active and networked fan communities to provide value in the form of user-generated content, and to assemble the required collective resources in order to follow increasingly complex transmedia puzzle narratives. As such, convergence culture takes place in an era wherein fans moved from the margins to the center of mass media's business strategies, and fan behaviors like deep analysis of popular media and the reuse of media became more and more part of everyday life for more people. Thus, as liking and reblogging saturate our digital existence, there's no longer much debate to be had between activity and passivity. Activity won! Hurrah! The problem is that many of us have the sneaking suspicion that activity may not be all we hoped. What often got lost in debates between activity and passivity was that the goal was never simply to show activity for its own sake, but rather to use activity as evidence that audiences can resist the mass media and act in their own interests. This conglomeration of concepts creates enormous confusion because activity, resistance, agency, and progressivism were sometimes all used interchangeably. According to the Frankfurt School, it is dangerous for audiences to simply accept the messages of mass media because those programs are produced and controlled by the ruling class and perpetuate the current system of economic inequality, essentially amounting to propaganda. Because the Frankfurt School believed in a deterministic relationship between base and superstructure, there was no need for them to theorize any form of oppression other than class, since for them class is the master category of social struggle. Resistance, in these terms, must be economic. The Birmingham School altered the rhetorical terrain of this theory by arguing that audiences are constantly resisting mass media messages and that ideology, that is popular culture in particular, is a valid theater of social struggle. However, they accepted the premise that when audiences actively engage with mass media, they do so to express explicit or implicit political resistance to domination of the economic sort, but also other forms, including things like sexism and racism. Yet, what if active engagement with media actually makes us less free than ever before, or empowers audiences to increase the oppressiveness of existing hierarchies? I was part of a generation of scholars and fans who welcomed the internet because of its potential to break down the one-way communication structure of mass media and democratize culture. We were eager for the demise of gatekeepers. We were eager for the disruption of existing business models and the undermining of narrow national narrative frameworks. Unfortunately, we got almost everything we wanted, and it turns out a lot of it is terrible. Every time I pick up my phone and check Twitter, I'm reminded of the extent to which people often choose to actively engage with popular media in order to do things like create value for companies, stop people from having access to political information, and demand the exclusion of historically oppressed groups from public life. Jenkins' most recent work in Any Media Necessary documents instances like the Harry Potter Alliance, the Nerd Fighters, and Black Panther fandom, wherein participatory culture creates resources and shared understanding necessary for bottom-up activism. Certainly such examples exist, but there are also numerous examples, from Facebook to Disney, wherein we see multinational media corporations at a larger scale than ever before, exploiting public creative expression for private profit, and manipulating flows of fiction and information in ways that often remain invisible to audiences. The net result of all this increased activity may seem less like an era of democratic media and more like the power dynamic has tilted even farther in favor of the owners of media than ever before. Since the early development of fan studies was intertwined with the Birmingham School, and fans are a canary in the coal mine of audience studies, I want to begin with this background before delving into a series of little case studies where we can see some of these tensions playing out through the still ongoing digital transition. In the past, fan studies was closely aligned with this activity-passivity model, but that model no longer adequately explains what actually occurred from the mid-1990s through the present. Further, because fan studies as it exists today was founded within the Birmingham School resistance model, it's critical that we re-examine what resistance may mean today in order to think critically about the differences between material and ideological resistance, and rethink what resistance means within a convergence media environment, when fans may want a closer relationship with the industry. Thus, examining these crucial years through the lens of what we now know about fake news, state surveillance, and the imbrication of internet platforms with the rise of populism and extremism allows us to reevaluate where fan studies and fan cultures may go from here. In the print and broadcast era, one of the foundational truths of media studies and fan communities was that fans were underdogs. Famously told by William Shatner on Saturday Night Live to get a life, fans were socially marginal and often held at arm's length by producers who regarded them with bafflement or open hostility as a niche audience with investments irrelevant to understanding the much more lucrative mass audience. But fast forward to the scene documented in convergence culture, when fan communities are now seen as tastemakers and a key demographic that can make or break a blockbuster film's success. The boundaries between fandom and the industry have become permeable enough that terms like producer, influencer, and entrepreneurial fandom have sprung up in an attempt to define the fuzzy gray area where audiences and the industry cozy up to each other. So are fans and producers on the same team now? I would argue the answer is no, for two reasons. First and foremost, because fans as such do not exist. Like my subheading, that phrase is deliberately provocative, so let me unpack what I mean. Because fan is the structuring category of fan studies, its meaning and boundaries may seem obvious, but it obscures important divisions. Early on, fans were often defined as extreme consumers or even slightly frightening obsessives. Jenkins and Constance Penley studied highly organized communities of fans with a clear cultural structure. Yet Matt Hills argued that individuals who simply like things a lot by themselves should also be a primary object of fan studies. All of these definitions were based on media fans, but the term can also be applied to music or sports, who media fans don't have much in common with. However, the term fan rarely, if ever, is used to describe aficionados of high culture, like modern art or opera, who often engage in very similar behaviors to pop culture fans. The term fan, therefore, cuts in two opposing directions. On the one hand, it's a label that divides classed taste cultures and stigmatizes people who love bad cultural objects, while on the other hand, it separates authentic fans from fakers. The practice of using the label fan to shame people for loving low culture is a strong reason to embrace the term and use it broadly in solidarity against elitist notions of cultural value. However, the history of using the term fan to exclude certain people and practices from fan communities points toward a reason to be careful about using the term unambiguously as a coherent category. Because defining who is and is not a fan is part of a power struggle over boundaries and hierarchies within fan communities, it's important to remember that there are many different kinds of fans, and only some have benefited from a closer relationship to the industry. You might be familiar with the flowchart I just put up. This is in Francesca Cappa's article, A Brief History of Media Fandom, but it's existed for a long time in various versions in fan communities. She points out that within organized fan communities of the print era, there was a strong hierarchy that granted greater status and prestige to predominantly male activities. This distinction is both rhetorical and demographic. There are more men involved in what I have called as-is fandom activities like trivia and collecting, which are more highly valued in the geek hierarchy, and more women involved in what I often call creative fandom, but is also called transformative fandom, which includes stigmatized domains like the writing of erotic fan fiction. On the other hand, the words used to describe the difference between more and less valued forms of science fiction literature are also themselves gendered, that is, hard versus soft. It is for these reasons that in my ethnographic work, many older members of Slash fan communities recalled that fan fiction and fan videos, especially about Slash, often formed a secret programming track of science fiction conventions that took place in private hotel rooms rather than public spaces, like the hotel lobby or ballroom. This hidden world is exemplified by the way Slash fan fiction was named and sold within a Western and especially American context. While fanzines featuring commentary or fan fiction of a general or heterosexual nature could be displayed in full view at convention dealers' rooms, Slash fanfiction was kept in a box under the table, only accessible to those who knew the right password, that is the word slash. The term slash is an artifact of this period, when it was a way of hiding homoerotic material in plain sight. Slash zines could similarly be advertised for sale in general fanzines, using the coded language Kirk/Spock with no explanation, so that only those who knew the shorthand would understand exactly what was being offered. Fast forward to today, when Slash is much less secret and the media industry is actively courting fan audiences. Yet these old distinctions favoring male-gendered and often implicitly white, straight, Anglo, and Western forms of fandom still have an impact. As Suzanne Scott explains, it is often straight, white male fans who have the most social capital and who are then taken most seriously by the industry. She documents that when Twilight events were first included at Comic-Con in San Diego, they were often deemed an illegitimate form of fandom because the attendees were largely young women. Similarly, Henry Jenkins and Julie Levin-Russo explain that when media companies organize official opportunities for fans to have input and engage with their media properties, the rules and activities often exclude female-gendered fan activities, for instance, by favoring live-action video favoring live-action video traditionally associated with male fans, while excluding remix video, which has traditionally been associated with female fans in a Western context. Further, although media is increasingly produced by enormous multinational conglomerates, those companies still tend to be headquartered in America. And although Bollywood and Nollywood are incredible success stories in terms of the quantity of their production, it is also still the case that American media is the most likely to cross national, regional, and linguistic boundaries. Fans from America and those who participate in English language fan forums thereby often also have an outsized impact on the production process. As a result, it's vitally important to remember the history of exclusion and hierarchy within the fan community, and therefore to be specific when saying precisely which fans have become influential within the industry. This is the sense in which I suggest, somewhat in jest at the start of this section, that we should stop studying fans. As I argued in my article, Homework in the Digital Field, what I really meant is that we should stop trying to speak for fans as a totality, because the norms, values, practices, and social status of fan communities varies greatly, and what is true in one historical period for one type of fan may not be true for others. Thus, as fan studies scholars, it would benefit us greatly to remain critical of this foundational category, that is the fan. So that's the first reason why we can't immediately assume fans in the industry are now symbiotic. Some fans are more welcome and interested in a close relationship with the media industry than others. However, there's also a second reason, and that has to do with the Frankfurt and Birmingham School question: whose interests does the media serve? Early academic commentaries often position fans as cultural dupes. Because they are such eager consumers of popular culture, they become doubly exploited, first by the regular functioning of capitalism that extracts surplus value, and secondly because the media objects they buy are culturally worthless. Jenkins and several others working within the Birmingham School recuperate fandom as resistant. Yet the fans who Scott argues have been most embraced by the industry may demand some shifts in taste culture, which can be difficult to classify as political resistance. As a result, some scholars argue, in a throwback to uses and gratifications theory, that fans are neither resistant nor exploited, but instead they are savvy consumers, using their newfound clout as a sought-after demographic to get what they want out of the media. Yet, as I argue elsewhere, this formulation ignores that in classic Marxist terms, it's not possible to escape capitalist exploitation through consumerism. Although certain segments of the fan community are now invited to participate more deeply in the production process, few to no fans are invited to participate in profit sharing, even when they are the creators of content that increases profit. This phenomena is even more extreme when secondary data markets are also considered, since consumers cannot make savvy or even conscious choices about how to leverage the value of their own data, since data is often sold in secret for uses that are not disclosed to the user, or even for uses that are impossible to foresee at the first point of sale. As such, although certain kinds of fans have now become the favorite niche audience of media producers, that does not necessarily give them real power in the business of turning media into money. If you study fans or engage in fan activities online right now, where do you currently find them? Are they on Facebook, on Twitter, the archive of our own, Kindle Worlds, or maybe Tumblr? Well, probably not Tumblr anymore, not after their enormous purge of content a few years ago. One of the most persistent questions for fan communities in the last 30 years has been how to construct reliable meeting places online. From the early 1990s at the start of the print transition to today, the technologies are sometimes unrecognizably different, but many of the problems remain the same, namely the tension between security and discoverability, balancing community needs with technological affordances, and the challenges of sustainability and preservation. These problems came with two primary solutions: either construct fan spaces on web infrastructure that was built and owned by others, or build fan infrastructure from the bottom up. Both tactics came with drawbacks, since using existing internet servers, platforms, and providers meant a loss of autonomy, while fan infrastructure projects could also lack stability due to budget and time constraints, as well as the difficulty of producing every component of a truly independent thing. With the choice between corporate-controlled fan forums and fan-created infrastructure, it's worth taking a step back to see what the past may help explain about the role of economic resistance within fan history and the diametrically opposed politics of corporate and fan infrastructure on the internet today. This section comes with a little bit of a warning. I'm about to talk about the glories of paper in a way that will make me seem like I am the oldest person on earth. Please do hear me out for a minute, because I promise this will circle back around to how we can apply these ideas to digital media. But here I go. Early examples of print fandom are exemplars of fans building their own infrastructure. Social gatherings for J-Nights, newsletters created for Jules Verne fans, and the Baker Street Irregulars Society all formed through the independent circulation of print by self-organized fans. By creating an annual calendar of events, constructing fandom-specific identities, such as the rivalry between Jane Austen fans who called themselves either J-Nights or followers of Austenolatry, and routinely entering into discussion and debate, they created an infrastructure that allowed them to reliably find each other and build a collective culture and history. Such practices likewise served as the backbone of Star Trek and other early media fandoms, which held regular conventions and meetings, as well as sustained a reliable audience for the circulation of self-published print and other fan-produced materials, including art, music, and remixed video. In this period, the underground nature of fan communities, especially those for less socially acceptable forms of expression, such as Slash, was both a strength and a limitation, because remaining out of mainstream consciousness was a form of protection from copyright holders and from social scorn, while at the same time it formed a strong limit on the number of people who could become involved due to the word-of-mouth initiation process. Fast forward to the emergence of the internet, which seemed to promise faster, easier global communication that could allow fan communities to grow exponentially. Digital technologies offer lossless copying, free duplication, and a theoretically limitless audience, which all seem like major improvements over the mimeograph machine and the slow, expensive circulation of paper fanzines. As fans slowly shifted the bulk of their social interactions and cultural production online, and as ordinary consumers shift much of their purchasing from physical objects to digital commodities, it's easy to assume that the best technology has won. People move online because the digital environment suits their desires. However, there is a sneaky factor that also shifted almost invisibly behind the scenes. Elsewhere, I've argued that what was lost is the autonomy of use inherent to material objects. Imagine for a moment that you are taking a train from Amsterdam to Paris, passing through Belgium on the way. As you approach the Belgian border, there's an announcement warning everybody about the upcoming border, so they have enough time to change their clothes in case they are not licensed for wear in Belgium. Passengers may, of course, also have to change again when approaching the border with France. This is an absurd example that none of us would stand for. Once you've purchased a pair of pants, the manufacturer has no say in how you wear them, where you wear them, what you choose to do with the material, and whether or not how you look in them is good for their corporate brand. Yet we accept that when we cross national borders, something very similar does happen to our digital property. In the moment that the train chugs across the border with Belgium, content that's been purchased outright or purchased to access can instantly vanish. Likewise, while a cookbook's publisher can't come confiscate your cookbook if they don't like the way you modified the recipes, standard terms of service agreements give providers broad authority to remove content they deem objectionable for any reason, including because of complaints by copyright holders about remixed or transformative content, even if they've been paid to host it. These examples are just a couple of a cluster of tactics for undermining consumers' traditional autonomy of use after a purchase, which also include banning secondary sales, preventing the making of copies for personal use, limiting the ability to share or have multiple owners, and replacing purchasing in perpetuity with temporary and limited licensing. Oh, sorry, there's the caption I was looking for. There we go. For fans, this has meant that the decades since the beginning of the digital transition are littered with ghost towns of failed attempts to create lasting fan spaces on corporate internet infrastructure. Fans have experimented with free and paid models, but from GeoCities to Yahoo to LiveJournal to Tumblr, they remain extremely vulnerable to both the targeted removal of content and to monetary exploitation. Platforms often remove fan content for at least 3 reasons: perceived copyright violations, adult content, and platform-wide collapse. Although the work of legal scholars such as Rebecca Tushnet and Sonia Katyal suggest that transformative fan works may be a protected form of fair use or fair dealing, and thus not a violation of copyright law, copyright holders frequently use cease and desist letters as a scare tactic, both against individual fans and against internet platforms and service providers. Although so-called safe harbor laws indemnify platforms from liability for content uploaded by users in most cases, it is safest and less costly for platforms to comply with cease and desist letters. As documented by Harvard Law professor Lawrence Lessig, the current YouTube Content ID system automates this process to prevent or monetize the uploading of material that has been claimed by a copyright holder, even if that material has been reworked into a new form that now legally belongs to the remix artist. Likely the largest purges of fan material were tied to the removal of so-called adult content. Depending on context, adult content may mean any explicit sexuality or nudity, or it may target specific sexual practices. Yet a long legacy of censorship efforts suggest that perceptions of which content deserves protection as artistic and which qualifies as obscene tend to target materials produced by and for women and sexual minorities. For example, the Motion Picture Association of America is responsible for rating films, including through applying the dreaded category X or NC-17 that dooms a film to box office failure by so severely restricting the audience in both age and respectability. The MPAA has a consistent history of using discriminatory criteria for giving an X, by, for example, classifying any same-sex intimacy as obscene. It's no mistake then that something like 50 Shades of Grey, the most popular and successful erotic novel for women in the last century, started its life as fan fiction. Transformative fan communities represent a robust space for the creation and circulation of sexual materials by women and for women, and offers a sanctuary for an enormous diversity of sexual identities and practices. As a result, these communities are extremely vulnerable to policing in the name of morality when companies like LiveJournal or Tumblr want to clean up their corporate image. Further, although most fan material within transformative communities is exchanged within an economically radical gift economy model, the digital economy makes these communities extremely vulnerable to economic exploitation. Organized communities for exchanging fan fiction in the print era established a norm for at-cost sales, which undermines capitalist assumptions that rational actors can only be incentivized to express and share creativity through profit. When fan fiction moved onto the internet, the value that fan fiction would not be sold for profit meant that without printing and binding costs, fan fiction could be completely free. Free exchange thereby forms the basis of a radical notion that there should be no economic bar to participating in culture and storytelling. As a result, non-profit circulation of transformative works is part of what makes participants into a community instead of just a collection of producers and consumers. In print zine production, it was often imperative for editors to recoup their initial investment, and they therefore strived to ensure that they curated a collection that matched audiences' desires. However, as I've argued elsewhere, free internet publishing also emancipated fan fiction communities from the capitalist logic of supply and demand, because since there was no monetary outlay for any individual piece of fan fiction, a nearly unlimited number of stories could be published regardless of demand. Consequently, the online gift economy model did not require editors, who could ensure marketability, and allowed for the proliferation of writing styles, techniques, and themes, escaping artificial constraints imposed by a capitalist marketplace. However, either implicitly or explicitly, many online service providers and platforms undermine fan fiction's free production and circulation by either commodifying it directly, as in Kindle Worlds, exchanging participation for ownership, as in the terms of many platforms and contests, or by leveraging it as content that creates value through likes, reblogs, and other forms of data. These unequal terms of participation, wherein publicly created value becomes private profit, is termed free labor by Tiziana Terranova. Because these forms of datafied capitalism are so hard to avoid on modern Web 2.0, Abigail de Kosnik argues that perhaps fan fiction should no longer be free. If someone is going to make money off of fan fiction, she argues, fans should at least receive some of it. Yet before giving up on the notion of community and the gift economy, I'd like to go back to the idea of autonomy of use to help explain why fan infrastructure projects present a genuinely different and economically radical alternative. Here is where I'm going to say that very weird, old-fashioned thing that I warned you about earlier. Print was sometimes better than the internet, particularly in terms of protecting us from censorship and economic exploitation, because it had greater autonomy of use. It's not possible to track exchanges of paper zines. And it's not possible to simply pull them from the cloud with the click of a button. There's no possibility of adding secondary charges or royalties onto a person-to-person distribution scheme. In other words, the print system was much easier to keep underground, which limited circulation but made it almost impossible for outsiders to control or exploit. Despite the slow physical disintegration of material objects, print also paradoxically offered robust opportunities for archiving. Despite the truism that once something is online, it's there forever, an almost unthinkable volume of fan material has disappeared forever from digital space during corporate purges and due to the demise of individually owned archives. Only recently, Yahoo Groups announced its intention to permanently discontinue their listserv service known as Yahoo Groups, and to delete their archive of listserv messages, including untold millions of messages posted to fan lists between 2001 and 2019. While individual fans may have copies of some of this material, much of fans' creative expression from the early internet era has been lost. Therefore, if we wish to understand the politics and meaning of fan fiction in a digital context, and especially if we are interested in investigating the extent to which truly autonomous zones of the internet are still achievable, it's imperative that we consider critically the economic context of each layer of fans' choices about online infrastructure. Only then can we fairly evaluate the differences between corporate and independent spaces and fully appreciate the audaciousness of a fully fan-constructed infrastructure project like the Organization for Transformative Works. From the beginning, the OTW was formed with the mission, as founding member Speranza wrote, to own the damn servers. Tumblr, LiveJournal, and Yahoo Groups could delete fan material en masse at their own discretion, because although fans made the content, they did not own the underlying infrastructure of the servers or the software, and often had to relinquish ownership over the content itself as parts of terms of service agreements. Some fans tried to develop individual projects from the servers up, but often found these costly and difficult to maintain as individuals, often resulting in burnout. As a massive, collective nonprofit organization, the OTW can keep all levels of infrastructure development in-house, from the servers and their maintenance to software development and coding to translation and tag management. As such, the OTW creates something approaching print-era autonomy and is thereby able to present an economically resistant alternative to digital capitalism. Of course, the OTW cannot actually extract itself from the larger digital economy and the internet, so it still becomes part of data markets, because its database is partly indexed and searchable by Google and other search engines. Its searchability means that it is still much more visible and thus vulnerable to legal challenge than underground print culture. This is why the OTW's volunteer legal team is indispensable to its economic radicalism. Without hiding, full autonomy can only be achieved by openly fighting for institutional legitimacy. This is the separation Michel de Certeau makes between strategies and tactics, wherein only institutions that can claim and defend a proper place may become strong hegemonic actors able to survive direct confrontation with other powerful social forces. Print was a tactic of the disempowered, which allowed the rogue economic life world of fans' creative works to flourish. But the OTW employs the strong strategies of an institution, which meets challenges on their own terms, and as a result can carve out a truly autonomous pocket of non-capitalist digital space. However, the economic underpinnings of transformative fan works tell only half of the story. Much of the attention paid to fans' political significance has been focused on their ideological function. In classic early texts, this usually meant celebrating fans as powerful resistors of the messages within the mass media, because they rework corporate narratives from their own perspectives. A more recent wave of fan studies scholars argue the opposite, that fans reinforce problematic ideological messages that were present in the original text, or that they actually introduce oppressive ideologies into story worlds where they were not originally present. Yet in both cases, there is a familiar error, largely to do with the use of too wide a lens. In the phrase methods from telescope to microscope, I mean to examine the frequent mismatch in the level at which the content produced by fans is studied, and the conclusions drawn about its political significance. In particular, it is possible for scholars in good faith to cite significant examples of both fan-created material that's politically progressive and fan material laced with racism and homophobia, because as a whole, fan material is completely ideologically heterogeneous. Studying the content of things some fans produce in one or a handful of fan spaces is not at all helpful in predicting the ideological meanings woven into fan works produced by other fans in other places at other times. Certain tightly knit fan communities may develop rules, genres, norms, and patterns that create structural ideological continuities, but these are rarely, if ever, shared universally, and usually open to a process of internal contestation and change. As a result, just as in the need to specify closely which fans we are studying, it would serve us well to draw conclusions about the ideological meaning of fan content narrowly and apply the microscopic approach more readily than the telescopic. Taking a microscope to fan works may seem counterintuitive for a few reasons, perhaps most importantly because, as Christina Busi and Karen Hellickson wrote, close reading has traditionally been reserved for high art and literature rather than popular media, which tends to be studied sociologically. In other words, because popular media is not considered formally or aesthetically interesting as high culture, it hasn't seemed as worthy of close scrutiny. However, this leads to the bizarre assumption that all fan material has the same content. That approach would be obviously ridiculous if it was applied to any other form. Slash fan fiction is organized by topic and mode of production, but no one similarly assumes that those are meaningful ways to organize scholarship on the content of any other valued medium. For instance, it would clearly make no sense to say that all articles published on newsprint are ideologically the same, nor to say that everything ever written about birds has the same political meaning. In order to understand the politics of a poem, song, or novel, as academics, we generally begin with the presumption that we will need to closely examine each individual text on its own terms. As fan studies scholars, we must likewise insist on the indispensability of close reading. Besides practicality, the telescopic approach toward treating fan work sociologically rather than individually connects two themes I've already discussed, namely the need to emphasize that fans differ from each other and the tendency to simplify what it means to act in one's own interest. As I sketched out earlier, part of the reason many early internet theorists took a utopian position was they assumed democratizing the ability to create media content through online publishing would allow everyone to have a voice and speak in their own interest. The interests of the people were frequently assumed to be for more robust democratic institutions and for a more equitable economic system, as well as for social and political pluralism and inclusivity. This assumption was made first because the traditional Marxist underpinnings of media theory, which treat class as a master category, and secondly because it made logical sense that in an oppressive system that only benefits a small elite, the rest of society would find solidarity in opposing that inequality together. However, this idea breaks down both because one's own interests are intersectional and because understanding and acting in one's own interest is not merely a matter of logic, but instead one of the great irresolvable challenges of human existence. Although the rational actor appears at the very heart of Enlightenment and modern political, economic, and social philosophy, I feel I'm not alone in saying that we as humans do not always make rational choices. We are not only beings of calculation, but also of emotion and meaning. Further, as Freud would remind us, it is not such a straightforward thing to fully understand yourself, and without honestly knowing and understanding yourself, making decisions in your own interest becomes nonsensical. Psychoanalysis also serves as a reminder that people regularly make choices they know are actively bad for them. People smoke, text their ex, and drive too fast, and sometimes all at the same time. Such behaviors serve needs beyond the reach of rationality. Creative expression is one of the moments when humans are most human in this regard. The stories we tell are not merely about our instrumental political goals, but instead make meaning of life and give voice to the sometimes frightening chaos of our emotions and our desires. For this reason, as documented by Christina Busi, some fans use the term id vortex to describe fan fiction, vids, costuming, and art, especially in their most erotic forms. The id vortex refers to the kind of fantasies that emerge in creative works without the filters of social responsibility that might be imposed by a formal editorial system, or if the creators were using their real names instead of pseudonyms. Sexual desires cannot be said to exist completely separately from politics, especially since the political often regulates the sexual. But neither can sexuality or creative expression ever become fully reducible to political goals. Politics consists of strategies and tactics and thus must constantly reform itself to adapt to the available terrain. The needs of the id cannot and will not reorganize themselves according to any limits of the superego or the natural world. They may be deferred or repressed, but they tend to pop back up in notoriously unreasonable, illogical, irrational forms. The id does not yield to negotiation in the same manner as the political sphere. As a result, we shouldn't expect fans' cultural expressions to follow predictable political patterns, especially when posted in fan digital infrastructure, wherein there are few to no external constraints on production. On the other hand, intersectionality, in tandem with fans' own structures for self-organization, act as the other main disruptor of political continuity in fan expression. As argued by numerous scholars from Gloria Anzaldúa to Bell Hooks, the determinist form of Marxism deeply misunderstood the network of intersecting identities that make up human experience and systems of oppression. Class cannot be a master category because poverty is experienced and imposed differently, depending on factors like race, disability, citizenship, and gender. As a result, even when people understand their own interests, and further, when they decide to rationally act in their own interests, there's no reason to assume they will act in solidarity with others who are oppressed by current social systems. They may instead choose to identify with a privileged category of identity and actively sacrifice others in the process. In politics, David Roediger argues this leads poor white Americans to vote for candidates who side with big business on economic issues, but reinforce racist policies, and thus these voters make themselves poorer in order to solidify their white privilege. According to Roediger, they thus, quote, take their wages in whiteness. Thomas Frank calls situations wherein the working class votes on perceived social issues aimed at undermining the full inclusion of women, racial minorities, and sexual minorities, rather than voting on economic issues, populism in reverse. Because unlike many economically radical populist movements in history, none of these issues will materially improve the lives of working people. They only make the lives of others worse. In fandom, we see something similar in infamous incidents like Gamergate, wherein male fans who felt oppressed by socially dominant forms of masculinity weaponized that feeling of exclusion not against the hegemonic gender system, but instead against women. Further, even when people self-organize into groups identified through a shared experience of exclusion, there is still no guarantee that all group members will agree on political tactics, nor that the group will be uniformly progressive on any other issues. Slash fanfiction is organized around the idea of same-sex storytelling, which remains underrepresented in mass media. As a result, the group has a shared progressive political interest in common. Yet most participants are not attracted to the practice on purely political grounds, and the community continues to develop new understandings of the aesthetic and political dimensions of representing same-sex relationships. Even if Slash includes a baseline political significance because it constructs LGBTQ narratives that are missing elsewhere in official culture, there is no systematic way in which Slash communities are politically progressive in any other form. And indeed, there have been a series of community scandals and discussions about problematic representations of race. Likewise, in my article, Domesticating Hermione, I documented the process of political dialogue within Wicket, which was a fan fiction listserv community dedicated to writing heterosexual romance about Harry Potter characters Hermione Granger and Severus Snape. Although the group was almost exclusively female, their shared status as women did not afford much in the way of political common ground, as they engaged in a long series of heated arguments about the role of feminism in romance and the morality of depicting rape in fan fiction. Yet this is not to say that individual pieces of fan fiction art and video do not offer deeply revolutionary glimpses of pluralism and social justice. Rather, this is where the microscope comes back in, because fan works do not have a systematic political continuity at the level of content. If we want to understand what's being expressed by fans, we must take them seriously as individual artists and authors and use methods of close analysis. Thus, in my article, The Politics of Slash on the High Seas, I argue that Pirates of the Caribbean offered fans a series of resonant narrative elements that could be used to make metaphorical arguments about the history of colonialism and racial oppression. However, only through close reading does it become clear how some authors actually intensify racist imagery from the films by subjugating symbols of rebellion to colonial rule, while others use slash romance to open the colonial body politic to radical alterity and create something genuinely radical. The enormous variation in approaches to political imagery in both Wicket and Pirate Slash suggests that if we take the telescopic lens, the political strength of fan creative communities is not their uniformly enlightened representational politics, but in their ability to create space for dialogue and the pluralist coexistence of multiple points of view and representational regimes. In my current book project, I call this system narrative multiplicity. Thus, if we continue to search for answers to questions like, why do women write slash, or is fan fiction politically conservative, we doom ourselves to failure. The telescopic view cannot answer these questions because there is simply too much variation between fans, fan communities, and forms of creative expression. However, if we do want to think at the macro level, we can find strength in fan communities as a whole in their ability to carve out space for unexpected encounters, dialogue across difference, and dreaming beyond the bounds of the market. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was just putting this back up. Thank you, Anne, so much for your presentation. I guess we're in time, but I'll just los invito a todos a que this is going to stay in the YouTube channel of the institute and also the Facebook page. So I invite. There's a question here from Ana Valeria. Okay, thank you so much, Anna, for asking in English. So she's asking. Well, first, congratulations for this thing. Well, the question is, what would you suggest to apply this kind of analysis in our context, meaning Mexico, other than consider intersectionality and economics? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Ayla got a little bit of the answer to this already because she and I had been working together for a little while, but I will now give the answer to everybody that I already shared with her, which is that I think it's so important at this point in fan studies to think within local contexts about fan works and to take seriously various cultural contexts, because there has been this real focus on the history, particularly of American fan studies and of American media properties. And even though American media properties continue to circulate transnationally and globally, the reception and the context and the way that those are used and taken up is going to be much more local. So it really is kind of the time for these kinds of studies, locally situated studies that can say not just, what did fan studies mean to Americans in the 70s, but what does it mean here and now? and the way that media is circulating both globally, but also the local within the global.
Me parece que tengo que traducir la pregunta, digo la respuesta, no lo sé, pero bueno, sé que Valeria lo ha entendido y para todos aquellos que no lo han entendido, es algo que Anne y yo platicamos en otras ocasiones y sí, más bien la sugerencia de ella hacia aquellos que estamos estudiando este tipo de productos es como hacerlo bien focalizado y muy centrados en dónde estamos, como desde dónde estamos escribiendo, en este caso desde Latinoamérica, como muy centrados desde dónde estamos escribiendo, tomando en cuenta todos los elementos que están inmersos en este contexto. En el caso, por ejemplo, de mi estudio, pues teniendo muy en cuenta el feminismo desde México, ¿no? Desde Latinoamérica y justamente como posición en el país en el que estamos y todos los elementos contextuales que están relacionados con este tipo de productos y cómo los estamos estudiando. Sí, I think there's the microscope comes in like really focusing on the fans and the fandoms and maybe not generalize everything, but using it to focalize on the particular fandoms and the particular fans. And I guess, yeah, that's like kind of the recommendation for Valeria, but also for everyone studying these kind of products and all these kind of media representations. Yeah. I don't know if we have any other questions, but we're on time. Thank you so much, Anne, for I don't know, we have still time, but well, I just I don't know if Cesar wants to come back and ask something related to this topic. If not, I'm just I have just a little like reflections about it, like but it's kind of related to these fan studies and everything that's going on and to studying through internet and social media and well the social network. I mean, like it's so tangled with the construction of the internet and how the hardware and the software has been developed. And I mean, like these initiatives, like Creative Commons initiatives, and all these. I don't know, like try to stop to monetize this kind of contents and giving the creators like a little more flexibility and liberty also in creating these kind of things, but it's so tangled. So I just find it quite interesting, like your proposal to return it to the paper, just because it's like liberating, but it's also it's tricky because it also limits us to maybe locally, right? Like we wouldn't be able to share it with like an internet level, you know. But it's interesting the proposal. Bueno, lo que le comentaba a Anne, justamente es que este tipo de estudios ha estado como muy relacionado con el desarrollo de Internet y cómo ahora pues el uso de las redes sociales hace más fácil, ¿no? Que podamos compartir lo que hacemos, ya sea fanfiction o fan art o incluso cosplay, y pues salirnos como de esos ámbitos digitales y regresar de nuevo como a usar papel para al menos compartir ya sea nuestro fan art o nuestra fanfiction. Claro que nos libera como de la economía y de que sea monetizado por Facebook o por Yahoo, pero también nos limita un poco, ¿no? Como, pues ya no tendremos el mismo alcance, pero es una reflexión interesante. Y pues nada, los invito a que comenten. Repito, esto va a quedar como grabado en los canales.
Pueden preguntar en español y ya tú le traduces.
Totalmente, sí.
Thank you,
pueden preguntar
for
aquí
your presentation.
pueden preguntar en español y se las haré llegar a Ana en cualquier momento.
Te decía,
Pero
Ayla,
bueno,
que pudieras comentar o que Anne pregunte finalmente cómo se relacionó con tu trabajo, que tú pudiste estar con ella en Países Bajos. Estás con el micrófono para... Ahí está.
sí.
Sí, ¿cómo entendió
César,
ella el trabajo que estás haciendo tú? Ajá.
César asking you, Anne, what's your opinion about the research we're doing and the things that I sent you and the things that you wrote about the research. And I don't know, I already told him, but he wants to hear it from you.
No, I really enjoyed working with you, and it's such a wonderful opportunity to work with students who are really excited about these kinds of areas. Because I spend a lot of time with introductory level students who don't necessarily know what their interests are. So it's really fantastic to work with somebody who has a clear passion and who's really interested in trying to think through how to combine this area of fan studies with interests in kind of feminist theory and the history of feminist theory, and also with concepts connected to mass media. So I think that's a really good combination. It's a good platform. And like we talked about, I think that it can only be stronger the more deeply that you continue to develop this angle of thinking about and what is the particular kind of context of specifically Mexican feminism and specifically Mexican media history, or Latin American media history, if that framework is more helpful, because that's really missing from the larger kind of conversation in fan studies. And I myself did some work trying to create collections of more transnational work on fandom, and I did a couple of collections, a little bit of a sort of push to get people to do more work in this area, but a lot more needs to be done. Yeah.
Well, I don't know, I guess, like, thank you so much for your words and for your feedback through my stay with you and at the Netherlands. And thank you so much for your talk. It's time for us to finish this exercise. And in the name of the Institute and in the name of Cesar, he's watching us, but he wants to thank you so much. And the Institute wants to thank you too also. I want to thank you for your collaboration, for your participation here. And well, I don't know, to everyone watching, gracias a todos los que nos están viendo desde donde sea que nos estén viendo, desde Perú, Sevilla, Países Bajos, México, Mexicali, donde estén. Muchas gracias por quedarse, por durar todo este tiempo, estos 3 momentos de este ejercicio, que fue bastante fructífero. Pues Anne tiene Twitter. Si no, de cualquier forma lo podemos poner en la descripción del video. We can put it like if you want, with your permission, I don't know. So people can reach you. And de cualquier forma, cualquier comentario, pues nos pueden hacer llegar por las redes del instituto. Y pues nada, muchas gracias a todos. Gracias, César. Gracias, Natalia, que estás ayudándonos a coordinar esto, al instituto, a la universidad también, por facilitarnos el espacio. A todos los que participaron, a todos los que nos vieron. César.
Sí, si me permites. Thank you for all. Bueno, yo necesito agradecerles a todas y a todos quienes presentaron y al mismo tiempo quienes nos siguieron, pero también agradecer y felicitar a Ayla, ¿no?, por la iniciativa, por la coordinación y por la organización de este evento, de este espacio, que siempre lo pensó como un espacio no muy académico, pero tampoco tan fanático, y trató de darle un sentido y un giro que creo que se ha logrado con éxito. Así que ahí las felicidades. Muy bien. Y muchas gracias a todas las personas que participaron y a todas las personas que nos siguieron. Y pues bueno, seguiremos tratando de habilitar y abrir espacios de este tipo para que sigamos conversando y analizando y reflexionando sobre estos temas. Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you.
Adiós.
Good night.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Good day, good afternoon. Thank you.
Bye.